The letter lay on the rough wooden table like a quiet judgment. Eli Turner stared at it for a long time, his weathered hands resting on either side, fingers scarred from rope burns and years of hard ranch work. Outside, the wind rolled across the plains, pushing dust against the windows of his small ranch house. The sound felt lonely, the kind that settled into a man's bones. Eli had lived alone for almost 10 years now, since the land wars ended and the town decided he was easier to forget than forgive. He was not poor, but he was not welcome either. Not since the fire. Not since the lies. The letter was from a marriage broker out east, printed neat and polite, offering him a choice of women who needed husbands out west. Widows. Immigrants. Women with no prospects. The town preacher had scoffed when Eli mentioned it. Only the unwanted ones go through mail order, he'd said, voice thick with judgment. Eli hadn't answered. He'd already learned silence hurt less than arguing. He unfolded the list slowly. Names. Ages. Small descriptions written by men who had never met the women they judged. Too old. Too plain. Too quiet. Too poor. And then he saw her words, written in shaky ink, squeezed into the smallest space. I'm worth not much, sir, but I can cook. Eli's chest tightened. Not from pity alone, but from anger. Whoever had convinced her she was worth not much had stolen something sacred from her. He read the line again, slower this time. There was no begging in it, just honesty. Survival. Dignity bent but not broken. Her name was Clara Mayfield. Age 24. Discarded by 2 families. Not suitable for city life, the note said. Plain face. Quiet. Hard worker. Eli folded the letter and pressed his thumb against the paper like a promise. He didn't need beauty. He didn't need silence. He needed truth. And something inside him told him Clara had plenty of it. The train arrived at dawn 3 weeks later, screaming into the station like it was angry to be there. Eli stood apart from the others, hat low, coat pulled tight. The townspeople had gathered out of habit more than kindness. They whispered when they saw him. Some looked away. Others stared too long. He ignored them all. Then he saw her. Clara stepped down from the train with a single battered suitcase and a shawl pulled close around her shoulders. She was thinner than the photograph. Her shoes were worn, her posture careful, like someone used to apologizing for taking up space. Her eyes scanned the platform not with hope, but with caution. When she spotted Eli holding a small paper sign with her name, her breath caught. She walked toward him slowly, like she expected him to change his mind. You're Mr. Turner? She asked. Yes, ma'am, Eli replied gently. She nodded once. Thank you for coming. Those words hit him harder than any insult ever had. Thank you for coming. As if men often didn't. The ride to the ranch was quiet. Not uncomfortable. Just careful. Clara kept her hands folded in her lap, eyes on the open land rolling past. Eli noticed how she watched the sky like it was something precious. When the ranch finally came into view, her shoulders sagged, not with disappointment but relief. It's bigger than I expected, she said softly. So was the work, Eli answered. But it's honest. That night, Clara cooked without being asked. A simple meal. Beans. Bread. A stew made from what little Eli had stocked. It tasted like something remembered, something warm. Eli ate slowly, eyes down, not wanting to make her nervous. I won't be trouble, Clara said suddenly. I rise early. I don't complain. I can learn whatever you need. Eli set his spoon down. You don't have to earn your place here, he said. You already have one. She looked at him, then really looked at him like she was trying to see if he was lying. Her eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. Pride lived in her too. What neither of them knew was that danger had already begun to circle. The next morning, men rode past the ranch fence slowly. Eli recognized them instantly. Langford's men. The same ones who'd taken his land years ago, who'd blamed him for a fire they started, who'd left him alive only because death would have been too kind. They saw Clara hanging laundry and laughed. Didn't know Turner could afford a wife, one called out. Clara froze. Eli stepped between them without a word, his presence calm but unmovable. The men left, but their smiles promised they'd return. That night, Clara told Eli the truth she'd never spoken aloud. She'd been blamed for a theft she didn't commit back east. A factory owner's son had pointed at her to save himself. She lost her job. Then her home. Then her name. By the time the truth came out, it was too late. No one wanted her anymore. They said a woman like me should be grateful for scraps, she whispered. Eli listened, jaw tight. They said the same about me, he replied. Turns out they were wrong. But injustice has a way of finding quiet places. 2 weeks later, Clara didn't come in for supper. Eli found the kitchen cold, the pot untouched. Panic climbed fast and sharp. He grabbed his rifle and followed the tracks leading toward the creek. Halfway there he heard shouting. Then a scream. Eli ran. Langford's men had cornered Clara near the water, accusing her of theft, calling her names that burned the air. One grabbed her arm. She fought back with everything she had. Eli fired a warning shot into the dirt. Let her go. They turned, surprised but amused. Looks like Turner found something worth protecting, one sneered. Eli didn't answer. He stepped forward, eyes blazing. You touch her again, and I swear this land will drink your blood. For a moment the world held its breath. Then horses thundered in from the ridge. The sheriff, townsfolk, witnesses. Someone had finally spoken up. The truth, once buried, clawed its way into the light. Langford's men were arrested. The old accusations against Eli reopened. Evidence uncovered. Lies exposed. And Clara? She stood beside Eli, shaking but unbroken, her hand tight in his. For the first time, the town saw her not as unwanted, but as brave. And this was only the beginning. The town did not change overnight. Truth never works that fast. But something shifted after that day by the creek, like a crack in hard ground that finally lets water through. Eli and Clara returned to the ranch with bruises on their bodies and heavier thoughts in their minds. Clara barely slept that night. Every sound outside made her flinch. Eli stayed awake too, sitting by the window with his rifle across his knees, watching the moon drag itself across the sky. By morning, news had already spread. Langford's men sat in the small jail, angry and loud, claiming they were being framed. The sheriff, a thin man with tired eyes, came riding out before noon. He dismounted slowly, hat in hand, and for once he did not look past Eli like he wasn't there. We need to talk, the sheriff said. They sat at the table where Clara had cooked so many quiet meals. The sheriff listened as Eli told his story again, the same one he'd told years ago when the ranch fire had destroyed half the valley. How Langford wanted his land. How the fire started on Langford's side. How the blame somehow landed on Eli. The sheriff's jaw tightened as he listened. Then Clara spoke. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She told him what Langford's men had said by the creek, how they laughed, how they used old lies like weapons. When she finished, the room felt smaller, heavier. I was blamed once before, Clara said softly, for something I didn't do. I learned what happens when no one listens. The sheriff stood slowly. This time, he said, someone is listening. It took days for the truth to crawl fully into the open. Witnesses came forward, some shaking, some ashamed. A ranch hand admitted he'd seen Langford's men start the fire years ago. Another admitted he'd been paid to lie. The town buzzed with it. Some folks looked at Eli with guilt. Others with disbelief. A few with respect for the first time. Langford himself arrived in town riding a black horse, his coat clean, his smile thin. He walked into the jail like he owned it, arguing, threatening, promising money. But money could not bury truth once it had air. By the end of the week he was charged. The land deeds were reopened. Eli's name was cleared. But justice always asks a price. One night as Clara washed dishes she heard a noise outside. A soft step. Then another. Eli moved fast, pushing her behind him just as a shot shattered the window. Glass exploded into the room. Clara screamed. Eli fired back, driving the attacker into the dark. By morning, tracks led toward Langford's old holdings. Fear returned, sharp and cold. I don't want to bring danger into your life, Clara whispered later, hands trembling. Maybe I should go. Eli turned to her, his face firm but gentle. You're not the danger, he said. You're the reason I'll fight. Those words settled deep in her chest. No one had ever fought for her before. The trial came with winter's first snow. The courthouse filled until people stood outside just to listen. Clara sat straight beside Eli, her hands folded tight. Langford stared at her like she was dirt beneath his boots. When she took the stand, her legs shook, but her voice held. She spoke the truth clearly, each word like a stone laid carefully in place. When the verdict came, the room exhaled. Guilty. On all counts. Langford was led away, shouting promises of revenge that echoed weakly against the walls. His power was gone. His name broken. Afterward, people came to Eli and Clara one by one. Some apologized. Some thanked them. The preacher who once scoffed bowed his head. It did not erase the past, but it softened it. Spring returned slowly to the land. Grass pushed through burned soil. Calves were born. Clara planted a small garden behind the house, her hands deep in the earth. She laughed more now. Not loud but real. At night, she cooked meals that smelled like comfort and hope. One evening, Eli found her sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky. "I used to think being wanted meant being chosen," she said quietly. "Now I know it means being seen." Eli sat beside her. "You were always worth more than they said." She leaned against him, not in fear but in trust. The ranch became a place people passed through then stopped at. Travelers. Widows. Folks with nowhere else to go. Clara welcomed them with food and kindness. Eli offered work and fairness. Together they built something stronger than land or walls. They built dignity. Years later, when people told the story, they didn't say she was the bride nobody wanted. They said she was the woman who survived lies, stood against cruelty, and helped change a town. And Eli? He was no longer the lonely rancher blamed for a fire. He was the man who chose truth when lies were easier. The man who listened when a woman said she was worth not much. The truth was she was worth everything. And so was the love they built, quiet, steady, and unbreakable like the land itself. Years passed the way seasons do on the plains, slow but certain, each one leaving its mark. The ranch that once stood quiet and avoided became a place of steady movement, not loud or boastful, just alive. Clara learned every bend of the land, every habit of the animals, every story hidden in the fences rebuilt by honest hands. She never forgot where she came from, and because of that she never turned anyone away too quickly. When women arrived with tired eyes and no plans, Clara saw herself in them and spoke gently, reminding them they did not need to shrink to survive. Eli watched her grow into that strength with a kind of pride he had never known, the kind that warms rather than weighs. Some nights, when the wind rattled the windows like it used to, Clara still startled, and Eli would reach for her hand without thinking, grounding both of them in the present they had earned. The town slowly changed too, not because it wanted to be better, but because it could no longer deny what it had witnessed. Children grew up hearing the story not as gossip, but as a lesson, about how lies can rule a place until someone brave enough stands still and refuses to bow. Langford's old land was broken up and sold, and no one spoke his name without bitterness. Once, a traveling preacher asked Clara if she felt lucky to have been chosen. She smiled politely and said she had not been chosen, she had been respected, and there was a difference. In time, Clara and Eli married again, not for show, not before a crowd, but under a wide sky with only a few witnesses who mattered. There were no grand promises spoken, only quiet vows carried by the wind, promises already proven by years of shared work and shared fear and shared hope. When sickness came through the valley one winter, Clara organized meals and care without waiting for permission, and Eli opened the barn to families who needed shelter, and no one questioned it, because leadership had found them naturally. Even when hardship returned, as it always does, it no longer felt like punishment. It felt like something they could face together. Clara never again described herself as worth not much. She taught others to cook, yes, but she also taught them to stand straight, to speak clearly, to believe their voices belonged in the room. Eli, once blamed and buried by rumor, became the man others sought when fairness was needed, not because he was loud, but because he was steady. And on quiet evenings, when the sun dipped low and the land glowed gold, they would sit side by side, not speaking much, knowing that love did not need grand words to survive. What they had built was not perfect, but it was honest, and in a world that had tried to strip them of dignity, that honesty was victory enough. The last test came quietly, the way real trials often do, without warning or shouting. One autumn afternoon, a young boy rode hard to the ranch, fear written across his dusty face, saying his mother had been turned away from town because of her past and had nowhere left to go. Clara listened, her hands still, her eyes steady, and Eli did not need to ask what they would do. They rode back with the boy and found the woman sitting by the road with everything she owned in a sack, her head lowered in the same way Clara once carried hers. Some townsfolk followed, uneasy, whispering that trouble followed people like that. Clara stepped down from her horse and stood in front of the woman, her voice calm but firm, saying that everyone deserved a place to rest and that dignity did not come from permission. For a moment the old fear stirred in the crowd, the habit of judging before knowing, but then someone else stepped forward, then another, until silence replaced the whispers. The woman and her child stayed at the ranch, then others came, not to take advantage but to belong, and the place grew into something no one could own alone. Eli watched it all with quiet awe, understanding that the justice he once fought for with anger had finally settled into something stronger, something shared. On their porch one evening, Clara rested her head on his shoulder and said she used to believe survival meant staying small, but now she knew survival could mean standing tall without pushing others down. Eli squeezed her hand, the land stretching wide and peaceful before them, and in that stillness they understood that the past no longer chased them. They had turned pain into shelter, judgment into community, and a single honest choice into a life that would outlast them both, carried forward in stories told softly, the kind that teach without preaching, reminding anyone who listened that worth is not given by the world, it is claimed by living with courage and letting others do the same. Top of form. Bottom of form. Time settled in like a gentle hand, and the ranch became known less for what had happened there and more for what continued to grow. Children who once watched from fences now ran freely across the fields, their laughter cutting through the quiet that used to haunt the place. Clara kept a worn notebook where she wrote recipes, not just for food but for living, small reminders about kindness, patience, and when to speak and when to listen. Eli added his own notes in the margins, simple words about fairness, about keeping promises even when no one was watching. Together they never claimed to have all the answers, but people trusted them because they never pretended otherwise. One winter evening, as snow drifted down slow and steady, Clara stood at the stove and paused, realizing how far her life had carried her from that trembling sentence she once wrote, saying she was worth not much. She smiled quietly, understanding now that worth had never been about what she could offer with her hands alone, but about the steadiness of her heart. Eli joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, and neither of them spoke, because some truths did not need sound. When they were older, travelers would ask how the ranch came to be what it was, and Eli would always say it started with listening, and Clara would add that it survived because someone chose respect over fear. Long after they were gone, the land would still carry that lesson, whispered through open fields and shared tables, reminding anyone who passed through that even in hard places, dignity can take root and love, when built on courage and justice, can endure far beyond the people who first dared to believe in it. As their hair turned gray and their steps slowed, the ranch did not fade with them. It held steady like it always had, shaped by the choices made long before comfort arrived. Clara's hands, once quick and unsure, moved more slowly now, but when she cooked, the house still filled with the same warmth that had first welcomed Eli home after long days. Eli's back ached more often, yet he still rose before dawn, walking the fence lines not because he had to, but because the land felt like an old friend who deserved greeting. People continued to come, though fewer needed saving and more came simply to learn how a place built on fairness managed to last. Clara would sit with young women under the wide sky and tell them she once believed her value could be measured by usefulness, and that it took time to unlearn a lie told too often. Eli would talk with young men about strength, explaining that real strength was not taking, but protecting what was right even when it cost you. When the day finally came that Eli could no longer walk the fields, Clara sat beside him on the porch, their fingers intertwined, the sunset spilling gold across the land they had healed together. He looked at her then, the same way he had the day they met, not as someone saved or chosen, but as an equal who had changed his life. When Eli passed quietly in his sleep, the valley mourned not with noise but with presence, neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder, proof of the community he and Clara had built. Clara lived on, surrounded by that community, carrying Eli's memory not as grief alone, but as gratitude. And when her time came years later, the ranch did not feel empty because what they created was never meant to belong to just two people. It belonged to every soul who learned there that worth does not come from approval, that justice grows when ordinary people refuse cruelty, and that love, when chosen with courage, can turn even the loneliest ground into home. As their hair turned gray and their steps slowed, the ranch did not fade with them. It held steady like it always had, shaped by the choices made long before comfort arrived. Clara's hands, once quick and unsure, moved more slowly now, but when she cooked, the house still filled with the same warmth that had first welcomed Eli home after long days. Eli's back ached more often, yet he still rose before dawn, walking the fence lines not because he had to, but because the land felt like an old friend who deserved greeting. People continued to come, though fewer needed saving and more came simply to learn how a place built on fairness managed to last. Clara would sit with young women under the wide sky and tell them she once believed her value could be measured by usefulness, and that it took time to unlearn a lie told too often. Eli would talk with young men about strength, explaining that real strength was not taking, but protecting what was right even when it cost you. When the day finally came that Eli could no longer walk the fields, Clara sat beside him on the porch, their fingers intertwined, the sunset spilling gold across the land they had healed together. He looked at her then, the same way he had the day they met, not as someone saved or chosen, but as an equal who had changed his life. When Eli passed quietly in his sleep, the valley mourned not with noise but with presence, neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder, proof of the community he and Clara had built. Clara lived on, surrounded by that community, carrying Eli's memory not as grief alone, but as gratitude. And when her time came years later, the ranch did not feel empty because what they created was never meant to belong to just two people. It belonged to every soul who learned there that worth does not come from approval, that justice grows when ordinary people refuse cruelty, and that love, when chosen with courage, can turn even the loneliest ground into home. In the end, there was no monument raised and no grand words carved into stone. The ranch remained what it had always been at its heart, a place where people arrived carrying quiet shame and left standing a little straighter. Seasons continued to turn, grass rising and falling, skies opening wide above the land that had witnessed pain and healing in equal measure. Those who lived there taught their children not just how to work the soil, but how to look at another human being without measuring their worth first. When stories were told by the fire at night, Eli and Clara were not remembered for tragedy alone, but for the simple courage of choosing dignity when the world offered judgment instead. The sentence that once defined everything, spoken by a young woman who believed she was worth not much, faded into history, replaced by the life that proved otherwise. What remained was understanding, passed quietly from one generation to the next, that justice does not always arrive with noise, that love does not require perfection, and that a single honest choice can echo far beyond the moment it is made. And so the land endured, carrying their legacy not in sorrow, but in steady kindness, a living answer to every soul who ever wondered if they mattered, whispering back through open fields and shared tables that they always had.